Hi, everyone. This seems to be a very, very small group, or it's slowly growing. That's okay. Um, I just checked out the time, and it seems that it might have been insinuated that this is going to be an entire hour. So I'm here to dispel that notion. It's going to be 30 minutes. I'm going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes, and then hopefully we can have a discussion. Because it's a small group, I genuinely encourage you to stop me and talk to me, and like I hope we can have some discussion, because the point of this talk is to make these kind of dialogues more accessible and possible. I'm going to assume you understand very little about how news media works and how communicating with news media works. So if it's basic for you, forgive me, and we can completely talk about it and try to push it up one level. My talk is called Don't Fear Journalists, Hacks, Exploit, and Best Practices for Improving Researcher-Reporter Ties. My name is Omer Benjakob. I'm an investigative journalist for Haaretz in Israel. It's Israel's last decent newspaper. It is. I'm not the last good journalist there. I'm actually not even among the best. But I'm very lucky in my work in that I get to do real interesting investigative journalism about the overlap between technology and national security. And that arose from a very interesting understanding that I was lucky enough to be able to make about the relationship between media and cyber, or media, and we'll call it the organizations researching the digital arena, because that's the way I kind of like to think about it. And I'm here because of my friend and collaborator Itai Cohen from Palo Alto. And I think the fact that I'm even at this conference and the fact that I'm even participating here is exactly for me the type of use cases that I'm hoping to kind of encourage you all to start thinking about and hopefully find local media partners in your ecosystem. I'm Israeli, but I'm from America, so I'm going to do this in a really American way, where it's going to be through my story, through my biography, and that way it will be accessible to you. It's a rhetorical tool. So I started writing for Haaretz I've been for Haaretz for 10 years now, but I started writing around COVID, which I think from the kind of cybersecurity perspective was kind of this big wave of attacks, like cyber COVID, right? It became this kind of term. And my newspaper gave me this job because for years, a lot of Israeli newspapers were covering technology, but they were doing it in a very kind of, I would say, technical, basic way, which I, in a nasty way, at least in the Israeli world, will describe it as startup nation pornography. So this startup company does X, this company does Y, according to this press release. And I think for a long time, the media ecosystem about technology and also about cybersecurity was very much within this kind of tech coverage paradigm, right? You have a company, you do some seed, you make some money, there's a press release, right? And the research would come out in very similar ways. And if you look at who was writing about cyber attacks, it was usually the same guys writing about the exits and the sales, right? It was the same kind of universe. It was covered from within an economic perspective. And it took a while for newspapers to kind of lift their head above the kind of, I think, tech discourse and start embracing a more national security discourse. And to put this in a slightly more blunter terms, it took time for us to get from this. So this is kind of the first big attacks on Israel, in which private sector companies were attacked as part of what seemed to be a national kind of wave of attacks by Iran. Sorry. To the kind of work that I've tried to do today, which is less, I would say, incident responsive, to put it in your terms. I'm less responding to other kind of, reports or things coming out and trying to put out new and different stories that are not necessarily on, I would say, PR department's radars. This story behind me is something that I did a few months ago that Itai also mentioned in our talk yesterday. And I think what's interesting about this story is that it was part of a massive part of a massive wave of hack and leak operations that were targeting Israel. And I would say about 80 to 90% of them were complete bullshit. Like, were complete overhyped, kind of like, attention grabbing stuff. And it took a lot of time to figure out, or to be able to kind of suss what was the actual big story, right? And I think as a journalist, it takes a lot of time to get to a point of confidence where you can say, okay, I'm seeing a wave of hacking leaks, and I can now say there's a wave in hacking leaks, or I can say that in my own voice, right? Because a lot of times we need cybersecurity researchers to say things in their voice. There is a wave of attacks on Israel according to Mandiant. We need this attribution. And it takes a long time to overcome the need for attribution and be able to kind of talk directly about the about incidents. I give this as an example because this is a story that no one in Israel had covered beyond me, because there was just so many hacking leaks that it was impossible to kind of figure out what was actually relevant and what was not. And only because I'm in touch with very serious researchers who told me, listen, we're seeing a different type of leaks. So a lot of it is hyping, but there's a few quite serious things. And we know this because we're active in this world, and we know that certain people are concerned, for example, or we ourselves as people are concerned. And to be able to kind of get to a point where you can also report on things that maybe your government is not necessarily super interested in coming out, and this will just be a completely random example, is also part of that. Because when you do journalism, you're trying to publish things that not necessarily people want to come out. And I think that creates a dynamic that is very difficult or very hard for people who come from more corporate or financial settings to kind of deal with, right? Because you're all signed on NDAs. You all have some procedural requirements to work through your things. And I have, in Hebrew we say, I have no God. Like I just, I'm just trying to get secrets out all the time. And there's something inherently conflictual about that. But my pitch to you today is that it's not actually conflictual, and that there is a workaround and there's a way to do this, because, and this is, I will say that just been a very fundamental, very profound experience for me being here, is I think we're actually all on the same side, and I think we're trying to do something that actually everyone here, or a lot of people here, want to actually create public value and want to help improve the safety, well-being of their fellow either citizens or humankind in a rapidly changing and very scary world. And just to be really blunt, we need your help. Like, we really need your help. I think the digital arena has been undercovered for many, many years. I think a lot of the issues we're seeing in many different spaces, including social media, arise from this kind of gap, where people, for example, for many years thought you couldn't write about Facebook without Facebook giving you information. You couldn't write about Twitter without Twitter giving you information. Generally, there's a lot of things in cybersecurity that you can't, or in the digital space, you can't write about without collaboration from the companies. And I think that's false. And I think that there's a massive world of knowledge that you all have that people like me are hungry for, and vice versa. And the goal of this talk is to try to kind of help us come together. So what's the problem? The problem is that cybersecurity research reaches journalists via PR and finalized reports. You all know what I'm talking about. And when I started off, and when Haaretz came to me and said, listen, we want to do like a cyber desk, but we want it to be national security focused. Like, we don't want startup nation pornography. And then I just started reading the reports, like those reports that you all put out and publish. And I have to tell you, they're very difficult to read if you're not in the profession. Like, no, seriously, I think it's an important thing to say. Like, it's in that sense, I think cybersecurity research suffers from a lot of the problems that academic research suffers from. That if you're not from within that discipline, it's very difficult for you to read a paper. And I think that as time progresses, we understand that's also an issue. Like, we want people who are intelligent and have MAs or BAs to be able to read articles in any field and be able to understand it at some level, or at least be able to access this information. I think the professionalization and specification, whatever, of your profession has created a world where a lot of your understanding and insight is siloed off from people like me. It's very hard for me to realize. It took me about 6 months to realize I don't need to understand what a rapper is to be able to understand why this report could or is not interesting. And that's a confidence leap. It's not something that, it's just your ability to say, okay, it doesn't matter. I'll just go to the end, right? There's a nice end part where they explain where the hackers, what they did. And you're like, okay, it's actually a pretty sexy, crazy story. You just put a million different technical stuff in the beginning because that's your novelty pitch to your community. And I think in that sense, there's a tension between your interests as researchers, your corporate framework that you work in, their interest as financial bodies, and our interest as journalists. But I think there is a huge overlap, like with science. There's a lot of information sharing. I think this has massive public implications. Like, journalists need insight, researchers need reach, and the public needs clarity. Things like the wave of hacking leaks on Israel took a while to kind of coalesce into a broad narrative, right? Each company maybe wants to take claim on, discovering or debunking any specific leak, but no company will come forward and say there is this massive wave. Like, in that sense, journalists also have a role in helping kind of consolidate different findings and different things. And it takes a while to get to the point where we can explain to the public in a kind of, I'll say, significant way how what is actually happening. And I think for that to work, people like me need to think less perhaps in terms of like scoops and access. Like we need to not be scary for you guys because it's scary to meet reporters because you think it's going to be in the newspaper tomorrow. And on the other hand, we need you guys to kind of also be able to step away to some extent from a lot of your discourse and be able to kind of do things that maybe you're not necessarily super comfortable with. I think the payoff is huge, to be really honest. I've done a number of different investigations and projects with different like journalistic collectives that also have digital researchers. This is just a screen grab from an undercover investigation we did a few years ago. About the fake news for hire industry. So it was also with newspapers and organizations from Germany, like Paper Trail Media and Spiegel and Zeit and a number of other kind of journalistic groups. And what was so interesting about this project is that it actually looked into something that I think a lot of cybersecurity researchers knew existed, but people in my world didn't, which is these mass avatar systems. This idea that there are systems for operating, I guess you'd call it botnets, but it's like more social media focused. And it was just one of those very interesting things where we went undercover. We filmed a number of like meetings with like literally fake news salespeople, like disinformation service providers, and we kept seeing this software that they were showing, and for us it just blew us away. And then a lot of the people in the kind of, I'll say, digital world knew exactly what it was, had a much easier way of to kind of being like, oh yeah, of course, like, you know, there's avatars, we're seeing it, there's got to be some system to run it, this is how it would work. You know, there's some SMS verification system running here in the background that allows them to automatically set up accounts and all these things, which were for us were just like science fiction. Like we had no idea because the year was 2022 and we still believed Facebook cared about taking down accounts. So it made no sense for us that someone could build a program that allows people to create automatically avatars and run them. I give this almost non-cybery example as an example because I think, and I just see heads nodding, right? Like a lot of you know what I'm talking about, but it didn't make it into any research, right? Like it's not on your radar. Like one of the most interesting things that's been happening to me for the past 2 days here is that a lot of people come up to me and say like, you know, I have so much information about disinformation or, you know, like fake accounts or campaigns, but it doesn't make it into our reports because our reports are about like the cyber stuff. And like I literally had someone come up to me and pretty much hand me like an investigation into a disinformation campaign yesterday. And he said, we'd done all this research on the sidelines of our work, but we couldn't publish it because our firm is not interested in touching on influence and disinformation. They just wanted, you know, whatever the digital aspect was. And I think there's something tragic about that. That means there's so much knowledge being lost, right? There's so much value that can be given in this two-directional relationship. And we can end up doing, journalists, you can actually help us do really significant work. And I can't go too much into details, but the technical forensics that allowed us to do this investigation are, in retrospect, wild. And was only built on the fact that we were in touch with really good researchers. So the next 5 minutes, I'm going to try to do like really basic media 101. If this is really basic for you, forgive me. But this is what I perceive to be as the main issues of people like us collaborating. And I want to try to give you a bit of terminology that will help you dialogue with people like me, because I think don't fear the journalists. We're not that scary. We don't actually want to fuck up your careers. Like, I don't want to screw up your NDA. It's not about that. I don't care about that. Generally, I'll tell you that my experience is that what is sensitive for cybersecurity research is usually the least interesting things for journalists. Like, I can't attribute this specific thing to Fuzzy Bear 25. It might be Jumping Koala 24. And you're like, I don't care. Like, I'm not going to write any furry animal in this story. I just want to say, like, hackers screwed up this system. Like, it's fine. They're like, no, because listen, we saw this shell. It's not, I don't know. It might be from Azerbaijan. It might be, I don't know. And you're like, listen, I don't care where the IP range is from. And it's like, and I think there's something really telling about that. I think it's actually really important to think about that for a second. What is actually sensitive for researchers and their companies is probably the least interesting thing for me. At just a very broad level. Like, your internal political, like, attribution of stuff is not really an issue for us. Or I'd say it's not inherently an issue for us. And therefore, I want to introduce you to a very important headline or field or term that is called on background. On background means that you can talk to me without being quoted. This is amazing. You're telling me something on background. It means, hey, I don't want you to tell anyone that I told you this, but we're seeing a lot of Iranian groups now focusing on finding open buckets and dumping them as if there's some really impressive cyber hack. But I want you to know that it's all open buckets that they're just finding, and like you're right, and it's actually quite shitty cyber, but we've now seen 25 of them happen in 3 months. And each one is being like pushed on. It's like, this is the biggest leak in Israeli history. And it's like, it's a database of like, old phone numbers or something. You know what I mean? And just the ability of someone to kind of flag that for you as a journalist is a lot, because then I can come into my newspaper and they're like, I read yesterday that there's massive, and you're like, no. It's starting. It's a wave, but it's not. We don't know yet. And a lot of times, just that framing, right? This ability to know what's happening, what you're seeing, gives us a lot. So generally, you can talk to us on background. On background also should teach you something else. You can set conditions and terms. So reporters are very, very used to meeting certain criteria or certain terms, right? I have tons of sources, even like in national security, that will meet me on a very set, strict of conditions. I can never quote them. We will never meet in public. I cannot record my meetings. Everything, if I do want to publish something of what they told me, I have to clear it with them first, for example. Or if we, so there's different kind of terms, and you can set those terms, and you can also just say, I want this to be on background. I'm talking with you now to share information. Like, it's almost like a Chatham House style rules. On versus off the record, very important stuff also. Even if you do want to talk to me, it doesn't have to be in your name. This is a very, very important thing that people forget. Like, I can talk to cybersecurity experts. There are many cybersecurity experts in the world. It doesn't have to be attributed to you. And I think I hope these two terms can help you kind of understand that there's actually a lot of space between the finalized PR reports that get sent to my email every morning, and which I dutifully ignore, and real communication and collaboration. Tips on trends. This to me is actually the most important kind of aspect of this, because I think as researchers, and also as I think journalism is a type of research also, I try to employ methodologies in my work and work in a systematic way. I think a lot of that has to do with, to be able to do that has to do with storytelling. Like, you need an iterative process to figure out what is actually interesting and what is actually the story. And a lot of times during these processes, we consult with our teams, right? We consult with our bosses. Like, you're crafting the narrative. It takes time to figure out what is actually happening. And I think this issue of like trends and what you're seeing, and the kind of stuff that you're all talking about in between panels, where you're like, we also saw this. Like after our talk yesterday, we had like 4 people come up to us from different countries saying, what you described in Israel is exactly what we're seeing in or in X or in Y, right? And this idea that you can share information even if it's nascent, even if it's still budding, even if you're not sure that it's an actual trend, or it just feels like a trend, is from my perspective something very important, because my challenge is not to publish reports, or publish reports in the same way you have to do, but to actually bring a new novel story forward, and to help kind of make this very complex technical world accessible. And I think it's just, I'll be really honest, like, I think it's really hard. I think what we do, all of us do, is really, really hard. Like, I think it's very hard to make technical things accessible. It's very hard to explain to people why processes that are happening in the digital space actually manifest in physical reality. It's a very hard sell to do. I think it's easy for reporters to stay in the classic, like, Checkpoint claims this group is now this. Okay, like, it's easy for us, because then we don't have to weigh into these bigger issues. Like, and I think as our reality, our political reality deteriorates, it's incumbent on us to be better than that, and to think bigger than that. And I think we all know that this dichotomy between physical and digital is quite superficial, and that we need to be able to talk about these trends in a way that is much more human. Or I'll say it like the way my boss says it: my mom needs to be able to understand cyber reports. Seriously. Like, I'm being completely serious. Like, we need my mom to be able to say, holy shit, there's a wave of ransomware attacks that is actually threatening hospitals like the one I'm a social worker at, for example. That would be very helpful, for example. I generally think that. And my mom is, I think, I would argue she's probably like the weakest link in the security chain of her hospital, because she called me like a year ago and she said, you won't believe it, I have an email. And I said, what do you mean? Of course you have an email. She said, no, from the hospital. They gave me an email account. She's been working at this hospital for 25 years, yeah? She had no idea. She had an Outlook. And it's like, just piling up with like spam. And you're like, oh my god, like if someone were to like just like she's a perfect target, you know what I mean? Like this entire just even this idea that people who work at hospitals could be exposed, right? Or scientists, for example. And that's as we do need the citizenry or people to be more attached or more connected to what is happening in this space. About sharing trends and about sharing information, how you can actually build trust. So from my perspective, and people who don't work with human sources a lot don't understand this. I don't know how many cyber people have like human sources, but my gut is that more than you would admit. I think a lot of you do a lot more human-based work than you admit. It just doesn't get into your reports, and that's the point. In Hebrew, we say whitewashing. We whitewash the source. Someone gives you a document, and you have to find a way to publish what's written in it without revealing the guy who gave it to you. This is actually my job. This is 95% of my week is protecting my sources and whitewashing my information. And I can take a tip that I got from someone, and I can take it to another company. Or can take it to another person that has an interest in coming out, right? Like think about tips you get from well-established researchers who don't want their names out there, as opposed to information you share with someone younger who's willing to take a risk in their name. So you can whitewash different types of information. You can get different information out. But the wider point is that I actually perceive this to be my job. So my job is to collect as much information as possible and then see how I can clear it and get it published without harming my source, without harming national security, right? A lot of times reporters also have national security considerations. Like a lot of times I can publish things that can lead to not national security in the sense of Israel's good name, national security in the sense of like for example, if there's a leak of 10,000 gun owners, then I'm not going to put a link to that leak, right, in my report. I want to say sensitive data about arms leaked online, right? What is the border between those kind of things? In that sense, I think it's actually similar to stuff that you do. I listened over dinner yesterday to a discussion about attribution, which I think is like among the most contested things in your field. And what was so interesting is that someone said at some point, but we never actually say how we know. Like a lot of times, like because you have access to data you're not supposed to. Or you're seeing or someone told you, right? Like one of the firms just said, yeah, we know it's them. Like we just saw this, right? But you can't say that. You can't say, yeah, Google actually looks behind the scenes and like doesn't give a shit about people's privacy and will share this information with researchers when it's in their convenient for them. You just can't publish it. Then you say, we're highly confident it's this person, right? So this highly confident stuff is actually the same way we work. Like when I have to publish something, at the end of the day, I'm sitting with a lawyer and my editor, and they'll just look at me in the eye and say, is this true? Do you know this to be true? Because if we know it's true, the attribution is the least important thing. I can say according to information obtained by Haaretz. That will be good enough if I know that it's actually true. I don't need to say according to the data file leaked to me by a cybersecurity researcher in Holland who was concerned by this phenomenon. Like it doesn't have to be at that level. In that sense, I think over time, the more coffee and interactions you have with people like me, the easier it is to have the trust and help build up a relationship which can lead to meaningful stories. Quickly run through 2 or 3 stories that I'm especially proud of that I think exemplify what I'm talking about. I actually write about offensive cybersecurity a lot and about exploit researchers. And just because I have a lot of kind of people who follow this field and are in touch with other exploit researchers, I wrote what I think is actually a very interesting story about this almost kind of like talent brain drain of Israel. And I think this is just an interesting example of a story that is not on any kind of research firm's agenda, but is actually very big on public significance. Like, for example, I think the Spanish government is super interested in knowing who's migrating to Barcelona, for example. Yeah, the Israeli ecosystem is also, I would say, interested in understanding where its talent is running off to. That is not, I'll say, in a Southeast Asian city-state. And I think in that sense, this kind of story for me was interesting because it touches on national security, on shifts in my national security. These hackers or exploit researchers are people who serve in the army, and the fact that they want to live in Barcelona also means that they don't want to serve in the army anymore, that they're leaving Israel, like many of us. And in that sense, I think it's an interesting and important story that's not on any organizations, or I'd say any cybersecurity organizations, agenda, because it's also about following specific people. And my ability to, for example, to take a name of a cybersecurity researcher and then do a corporate analysis on them. It's all based on information that is shared with me on trust. Yeah, I'm not Like these people know these names, right? Another story which I'm really proud of that came out not long ago is a story about headhunting, Huawei's headhunting in Israel, which also touches to offensive cyber because a lot of the headhunting is done around people with experience in the army, and I had a number of people send me like job posts that like Huawei and Xiaomi were doing in Israel, and people just told me like, listen, in America this is not legal. Like you can't, like if you're a Chinese firm, you can't headhunt people who have been like in Booz Allen or in L3 Harris. It's just not something that is like at least socially acceptable, if not also legally acceptable. And in Israel, it's just not really an issue yet. And this story is not supposed to be like anti-Chinese fear mongering. It's just supposed to be this is an issue that in the West more and more countries are now discussing. What is the border between like red teaming and defensive cybersecurity when it's for a Chinese firm? In America, because of Trump and other stuff, this has taken on a very specific form. But we're not in Israel, not yet having this discussion, but we need to be. And this text was de facto a debate between like 2 or 3 different people and 2 different lawyers saying, yeah, this is fine, this is not fine. If you served in the IDF, you can, or you can't work for Xiaomi or whatever. Those are just 2 examples of what I think are high interest, like high like stories with cybersecurity or cyber aspects that have public value and don't harm anyone's financial interests, and are an example of the kind of work I think you should be helping people do. That was generally my talk. If anybody wants to ask questions, we can. I think we have like 5.